Amen. So we've been looking at GC 611 and we've seen how we can create a structure going all the way back from 2001, 2012, 14, 16, 18 up to the close of probation. The way we did that was by understanding what the midnight cry was, that there was an alarm and then there was the true midnight cry. We've established that, and we can then use that history of the midnight cry, the alarm, and the true midnight cry. There's two midnight cries there, and we can parallel that to the history of the Sunday law. I think that's a much better way to approach the problem than trying to change 1840 and bring it back to 9/11 and try to make an application that way. I think you gain a lot more truth actually following the guideline, if I can express it that way, or the direction that Ellen White's given. When we did that, we saw that there was a major event, April the 19th, 1844, and what we're beginning to see, we already knew this in fact, that there's an additional waymark between the Sunday law and the loud cry. So when we come back to our own history and we mark 1840 with 2014 and the summer of the loud cry with 2018, we know we've already marked 2016 in that history. 2016 was marked in that history by going back to the story of Pyrrhus, and then you start factoring in the First and Second World Wars, and you begin to see that 2016 becomes a new waymark. And we can see that waymark in Millerite history. It's August the 1st, which is Concord. But when you come back to this line, it's not Concord. We have to take a particular history and identify it in two different ways. Hopefully we're able to do that we can see 2014 is being typified by 1840, but the way we have approached it is by looking at it as being July. When we do that, we went for April the 19th for a number of reasons. The primary reason is that April the 19th becomes a clarification of the midnight cry message. Hopefully we can see that. Preceding 1840, there is a cry that Jesus is about to return. We know that, but in 1840 the cry is essentially established. And so that's why I was marking 1840 as that waymark. It's a glorious manifestation of the power of God. Just in the same way that the Sunday law becomes also a glorious manifestation of the power of God when angel of Revelation 18 comes and gives power to the third angel as it begins to swell to a loud cry. Then when you get to April, we know that the mistake is discovered, and that mistake or disappointment then becomes a clarification of the midnight cry or the cry. So that's what we're picking up. And then in the summer, it's an established understanding of what the midnight cry is, that now they have time brought back into the message. And so we've got it here, April 1844, the cry is clarified. 2016, the cry begins to be clarified. Sister Tess begins to do her work, beginning with Acts 27, goes to 273, goes to Pyrrhus, and then I think most of us are reasonably familiar with the material that she's doing. By the way, do we all know that the symbol of 273 that is taken from Acts 27 and Numbers chapter 3 is what waymark? Sorry? Midnight cry? It's not the midnight cry. It's this waymark itself, 2016. 2016, where she first begins to study this, actually becomes the waymark of 273. She didn't know that at the time, but now as further light has been given, and we've seen this waymark coming up multiple times now. I think we've got it in about 4 dispensations for sure, maybe 3 dispensations, no, 4 dispensations for sure. We've got this waymark here, we can see it. Once we can do that, then upon a testimony of 2 or 3 things established, you can see in every dispensation, and we know that the 273 is lining up with this waymark. So that's, if you're willing to see that, a second testimony that when it was first put to view, because that's the argument that was made, that in 2016 the clarification is made on what we're going to be talking about November 9th 2019, which is October 22nd here, that it is actually the 273 which was first brought to light in 2016. Everybody see that logic? Yeah? Want to remember what happens in 1840, the classic way we approach Millerite history. What do we say? I don't mean Islam, but connected to that. What is 1840 important for?
History.
Sorry?
History.
Restraint, not with respect specifically to what happens with Islam, because Islam is the external event. What does it do internally? What is 1840? How does it give the movement an impetus? Sorry?
The roots are confirmed.
The roots are confirmed? So it's a confirmation of what? Of time. I was just going to go with that. It's a confirmation of time. So not only do we have a cry that we run through this history, we've got time established here, and April the 19th. What about time there? Is time established or not established? Brother Andrew? Okay, so normally we would say it collapses. There is no time in April, but now I think we can see, if we can conceptualize that the cry is established, I think we can make the argument now that time is established. How does time become established? How do we establish time in April? How do we establish time?
I can say, I cannot give a real answer, but in the work of Samuel Snow there.
Okay, the work of Samuel Snow?
Yeah. I could also give the same reason, and also that the time is established in the sense that when they were having misunderstanding, they went to the Bible and they clarified that mistake, and they understood the time was to extend.
So even on that basic level, when the cry collapses, when time collapses, then it's confirmed that the cry still must happen. So we see a clarification on the cry in April, even though it's developed or created through a mistake. We see the same thing with time. We can also see that Samuel Snow is really coming into his own in April, as the movement is, as the people in the movement are going down, but the movement is coming up. Because I think we now have to see that Samuel Snow is a similar representation of the movement. It's not all of the whole body of people. Can we do that? Can we see a single individual representing a movement? I would argue yes, because in the history of Christ, you can argue that when all the disciples flee, that they become a symbol of all the foolish virgins, and when Christ remains firm, that he becomes a symbol of the movement. He's a wise virgin, all the others are foolish virgins. Someone's going to say something? Someone said something?
Snow's time did not collapse as well.
Okay, yes. Snow's time does not collapse. He already knows the time beforehand. His message doesn't collapse. And in the summer of 44, we obviously know that time is now an established principle in the movement. So we can run the cry, we know the cry is the cry of time, essentially, but we can also run the thread of time. So I think April the 19th is this midpoint that we can mark here, if we're okay with that. And again, that's identifying characteristics here between the Sunday law and the loud cry in 2016. What else did we have? April the 19th. If we bring this back to the binding off or close of probation, Daniel 12:1, there's a death decree after that, and the death decree produces severe disappointment in the people. April the 19th, we have a disappointment. 2016, we've got a separation. We see a separation in our movement. It's one that people struggle over. And the separation is over the binding off message. And the binding off message is 2019. Even though it's not identified in 2019, it's identified as Raphia. And at the very time that's been identified, there's this separation. There's great light, which is the light of Raphia. So we have that connection. The arrival of the second angel. The second angel does two things for the movement. It identifies that those who have failed become Babylon, and also what does it do? Sorry?
Comfort.
It comforts the people. We saw that it brought great light. Remember that? In the Advent Movement Illustrated, there was this great light, and then it turns into a glorious light later in the year. So we've got light here. 2016, we've got election, and we've got the Protestants. What did we say about that? Oh no, so what we're saying here is April the 19th, the Protestant horn began to fall, and 2016, the Republican horn began to fall. I know we can mark that back at 9/11, but you can also mark it in earnest now with the presidential election of Donald Trump, because part of the people that are really going to push behind him, don't care about his morality, is conservative Christianity or apostate Protestantism. So you can see the beginning of the fall of Protestantism and the beginning of the fall of Republicanism. And we've made the clarification, the issue about the clarification of the cry, clarification of time. So I think we've got a lot of evidence now to identify that there's this midpoint here, and it would be April. Any questions on that or additional thoughts? Sister Ruth? Okay. The death decree? Can you answer her question?
We say it comes.
Make sure she can hear you. Can you hear? She can't hear you.
We say it comes between the Sunday law and the Lord cry.
You got to give a bit more explanation.
So we established that the history, the Sunday law history, and we lined up with the history between 1830 and 1844. And when we look at the structure, we have from the Sunday law to COP parallels 1840 to 1844. Now Sunday law is lining up with 1840, loud cry is lining up with the summer 1844, and the close of probation is lining up with 1844. Now the way mark between Sunday law and loud cry is equal to the way mark between 1840 and the summer of 1844. Now the way mark in between is April 19th, and then the Sunday law history, the way mark between the Sunday law and loud cry is the 33.
Is that correct?
It's not good.
Okay, explain.
How we come to a death degree, we go through the history from Daniel 12:1 to the second article. So in the middle there is a degree to kill that people, and that is death degree. And there is a voice of God, we can call us the loud cry. And we take that line and bring it into this pattern, of 1840 to 1844. This is where we can line up the death decree, which disappointed the 10, with April 19, the disappointment that was in April 19. So we also do that on the Sunday law and payroll to outline down, which is 2014 to 2019. I think this is how death degree comes into.
Did that make sense? No? What didn't make sense?
I'm just trying to think now why 1840 is done as well.
Why is 1840 Daniel 12:1? Okay? Sister Emma, is Daniel 48 Daniel 12:1? No, it's not. 1840 is not Daniel 12:1. We're not suggesting that it's Daniel 12:1. Not suggesting it's a close of probation. What are we doing, Brother Rogers?
What?
She says Daniel 12:1 is now 1840.
Okay. From Daniel 12:1 to the second advent, we have a structure. So it is that structure that we are trying to line up.
We have this structure.
It is that structure that we are trying to line up with the history of 1840 to October 22nd. In fact, what we did, we had a quotation from GC 611.
Same one that you read us.
Yeah, the same one she read. And in that quotation, what Ellen White is doing, she's comparing the Sunday law history. So we have the Sunday law to the close of the In fact, it was the Sunday law. Now she's paralleling the Sunday law history to the history of 1840 to 1844. So there we entered 1840. Then our brother made a suggestion that 1844 would line up with the close of probation. Then once we had this structure from GC 611, we went to, I think, a quotation by Damstich, where he gave us more details.
Yep, page 96.
Somewhere it's illustrated there.
Yep, it's all illustrated here. And what does he say? It's in here. What does he say?
So he said 1840 was the alarm of the cry. The summer is the true cry. And we came to this Sunday law history, the true cry of the summer we lined up with the true loud cry. But we realized that between 1840 and the summer, we have two imams in that history, which is 42 and 44. April. So we wanted to look for witnesses, because to choose between those two imams, is it 42 or 44? Then we began to give evidences for 44. And we said the strongest witness to that was what Brother Robert told us. He created a history that from 78, though William Miller is not there, the cry is developed, the alarm cry is developed, is given in 1840, continued, that cry is clarified in 1844. So once he created that history, which is basically how we are supposed to teach based on the study on parables, then we began to give more witnesses to show that it is April and not 42. And those were the witnesses that were given. So one of the witnesses we began to give is that Sunday law close of probation is a binding oath. Therefore, we could line it up with the binding oath of close of probation second advent. And we saw this binding of close of probation second advent. We have two remarks in between there, which my brother said, the voice of God, which is the cry. Then we have the decree. So it is this structure of the binding of that lines up with that history. Therefore, we picked up that from the death decree, it's a great disappointment to the 144,000, just like 44 was a disappointment to the Millerites, and therefore you're saying the Millerites are a symbol of the 144,000 in this history. So it's the structures of the buying off that we are lining up, but you're not saying that it is what is close of progression.
You can do interesting things with parables.
Yeah, I think I'm understanding the overview in, for example, GC611, Ellen White is talking about activity, but then we can see the Sunday law in there. So that's where, well, that's where I'm guessing where it started from. So now we're seeing what can we learn from the Sunday law to the codification, but then the light from, I didn't understand the paragraph from Dan's but I haven't seen it, where he makes a connection between 1840 and the midnight crime.
He's quoting Stores. I think it's Stores. Is it 96.3? And he says, Stores says, he quotes, in the summer of 44, they recognized that was the true midnight cry, and the other one was just the alarm. And I'm saying, what was the other cry? When was that? And we could say in a generic term, it was right from the very beginning, 1798, they were crying. But we know that that cry becomes firmly established in August 11th, 1840, when the day for the year principle is established. And so I'm marking 1840 as the cry, in agreement with the GC 611 statement that says 40 was a glorious manifestation of the power of God. It's when the cry goes to the world, it becomes a worldwide phenomena. Himes, who has joined in December 39, begins to publish, I think in February 40, and the movement begins to gain traction through the work of Josiah Litch. Everybody knows he's made the prediction. Nobody's interested in his prediction until it becomes fulfilled. So that's why we're marking 40 as the midnight cry. I think we have reasonably good evidence to do that. And so what we've done is we've taken the history of the Millerites, we've taken a famous passage from Great Controversy, and we've expounded upon that, rather than doing the usual route. Oh, and the connection is that the angel of Revelation 18 comes down at that same moment. You parallels those two histories, and you can demonstrate from GC 603 and early writings 277, which are the first paragraphs in two chapters, the loud cry chapter and the final warning chapter. From those two paragraphs you can demonstrate that the angel of Revelation 18 comes down at the Sunday law. So therefore we know that the anchor point is the Sunday law. So based upon those 3/4 passages, we've created this structure. So the issue about the death decree is borrowing a different dispensation, which is the binding off or the harvest of the 144,000, that history, and bringing it into a separate history, or cutting the line and bringing it underneath and paralleling its previous histories. Therefore the death decree lines up with the disappointment of April. Did that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so I want to ask us a question, seeing as Sister Ruth asked us that, because a question's going to come up. When you have a reform line here, how many lines is that? It's an obvious question, it's not a trick. How many lines is that? So one line. And it starts here and it ends here. So you walk this line, or it's a line of, what's the word I'm looking for? Progression. When you have a line of progression, what are you not allowed to do? You can't do typology. So this history 1, cannot typify history 2. Do we agree with that? Yeah? Don't want to say it's a firmly established principle, people might argue, but I'm suggesting that is so. What's the problem? Based upon what we've been studying, all of this, what's the problem? What's the problem, Sister Ruth? What? All of this stuff that we just did. If you're going to say typology, you have to explain what the typology is, not just say it.
Because, for example, 1840 wouldn't exactly be the Sunday law.
1840 is another history. I can do anything I want with another line. Don't mind doing that. Yep. Yep. Brother Wilson? If you did this study with someone and they would say, wow, that is beautiful, some clever person is going to say, there's a problem, and we have to come up with an answer to that problem. Hopefully we got one. Or we're going to work one out in a minute. No?
So, I think there is typology.
Explain it.
In this sense, we have the history between Sunday law and the course of probation.
Okay, here we have Sunday law.
Course of probation. And we are bringing it down to the history of
The other history?
of 2014 and that.
Okay, so you want to do it that way? No, try and do it this way, Sunday law.
I'm saying it's a continuous line from.
I'm going with Sister Ruth's question.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, what do I want to put here? Someone else. Sorry? Okay, so I'm going to put the binding off. It's the history of the Sunday, history of binding off. What waymark did we pick up here? And we said that is being typified by whatever that we're going to call that waymark. Yeah? So we're doing typology. How can we do that? What is this history here? This is the binding off history. No, not binding off. This is harvest. And what's this? Latter rain. We've got progression, and now we're doing typology. How can you do that? Can everybody see the problem? My brother was going to do it another way. We'll do that one in a second, but I just want to see us to see that one, because she said, how can you have a death decree? Was there a death decree in Millerite history, or is there a death decree here? So we can see we're doing typology. How do we do that? Someone has to explain. Sister Joy. Can we see the problem? You can see the problem. My brother?
So I see the problem in the progression, but I understand that I see no conflict as such, because I understand that what the latter rain there is also a harvest for another class of people. So I would suggest that harvest would typify the harvest of that.
Did everybody understand that, what he said? What were you going to say, same thing?
I was going to say, like, when you are saying close of probation, second advent is the harvest or the binding off, that's for a class of people. the 144,000. But we know that in our history we do in different classes. So we know that Sunday law close of probation history is also harvest for the 11th hour workers.
So what we've done here, which is not visible, is we've got multiple lines, one on top of another. We've got 4 lines, priests, Levites, Nethinims, 144,000. And what's tucked into this is that this is harvest 2, and this is harvest 1. And even though it looks like it's a latter rain, what we're doing is we've got 2 separate lines here, and we've overlaid them, and we did that without even explaining it. So we have the license to do this because it's not breaking the rule of progression in typology, because when we did this and bringing the death decree back here, it is typology because we have 2 separate histories, 2 separate lines. This is the line of
11.
the Nethinims, 11th hour workers, and the 144,000. Does that make sense? Yeah? And if we were going to do what my brother said, so I'll rub that out, and then this would be Sunday law, and then we'd have to have a gap, obviously. This would be the priests. No, I don't know if I can call it the priest. I don't know what to call it from this history here. I just call it the priest. It's not an accurate way of expressing it. We'll do the same because the history of the... No, I don't know how I'll do it. This is also the Sunday law of the priest, and this is the Sunday law for the 144,000. If we do it that way, again, it's progression, but we're using it is in the sense of typology, because this is not the death decree now. This is that X, and this is, what is this one?
That is 2016.
Good. So this is 2016. So again, it looks like progression, and it is. It's a line of progression, singular line, because this line goes all the way essentially from 1989. But we're using it with typology, and the reason we can do that is because it's 2 separate histories for 2 groups, one for the priests, one for the 144,000. So that was a useful question because it explains something that will definitely come up that people would question.
So when we do harvest 1, harvest 2, is that typology?
Is harvest 1, harvest 2 typology? Brother William, is that?
I think it is.
Yes. Yes. Why do you ask the question?
What's the difference between progression typology and fractals?
Okay, what's the difference between typology and progression? Or you can do the whole thing.
I understand typology and progression and fractals to be the same thing.
They're all the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay. We understand typology deal with different lines, and progression deal with only one line.
So, typology is different lines, progression is one line.
But the progression, the line of progression, kind of gives you a template to be able to make an application in the fractals.
The line of progression can give you...
The template gives you a structure and a template to be able to make an application when you're dealing with the fractals. To make an application with the fractals, that is the typology.
Okay?
You understand typology? It goes interdispensational. connects two dispensations without necessarily making a distinction between them. An example is you find a line elevate giving lines that don't make a distinction between Millerite history and our history. But from that line, we are going to get a structure to understand our history.
So typology is interdispensational. What does that mean?
Connects two histories without necessarily making a distinction between them.
So history 1 and history 2 is going to connect them together.
Yeah.
That's typology.
Now, yeah, when you cut them and overlay them, now it becomes typology.
Oh, okay. So you just want to do that. So you've got that structure. Then what?
So you have that structure of progression. Then you may come to history 1 using on the structure of progression, also understand history 1 in that sense.
So I'm getting confused. Which one are we doing, progression or typology?
Progression.
So, okay, we'll start with progression. So you've got two histories like this, and you've got progression. And explain what you just said.
Then, once you have progression, it gives you a structure. But you can come back to history 1. This history that is tied to history 2, you also have a structure of it. So you have two witnesses to understand history. Let me call it history 3. That history at the end.
So, if we're doing progression, we take the beginning of this history and we go all the way to the end. And we recognize that there are individual histories in that. So this is progression, and typology is history 1, history 3, and this was history 2. And if you do history 1 and 3, you have to break this line. And this is typology. So progression is when you take a line of history that you recognize it has individual histories in there. It could have more than 2, I've just put 2 there, and it ignores that, it just goes from the beginning to the end. This is Genesis to Revelation, the everlasting gospel. We know there are multiple histories in that. Then you can go to individual histories, the history of Genesis and the history of Revelation, and see that they parallel or are copies of one another, or types. So therefore we have this typology. And then fractals. What's a fractal?
Maybe my understanding of fractal is in a similar history, but part of that history is still different in the larger history.
So we could take this history 2, and if we looked at history 2 and we looked at the pattern of it, the pattern of history 2 would be the same as history 1's pattern. So this little history here, its characteristics would be identical to the characteristics of this large history. So I think that's the definition that we use for fractals. So why did you ask the question?
So is fractals the same as typology?
So is fractals the same as typology? No?
Yes.
It is? It's not. Why is it not the same?
So we have seen there that typology is taking, we have seen progression that you take several histories in a line, and then typology you come and you compare the history 1, the beginning of one history and the end of one history. So there are 2 histories. So you have brought 2 histories from the major line that is the progression. And then when you come to have a fractal, we take a portion of an history, and you break into several places, events in its history.
That sounds like typology to me. Anyone else?
Right.
What question are you answering?
Robert's question.
Which is?
Is typology the same as fractal?
And your answer is?
No.
Why?
In typology, we see like history 1 and history 2, or the characteristic of history 1 is compared to history 2, but in fractal we see a bigger history is being reduced, or to teach us with a smaller portion of some history.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask, hopefully you can see it down here because I don't want to rub some of this off. If I did this, 1989 to close of probation to second advent, that's a line of progression, okay? So I want to give a type of that. So if I did a type, I'd have to do this, wouldn't I? Get a line upon line underneath it. So I want to do this line and put it underneath it. 1989, Raphia and Panium. So is this typology?
Yeah.
Is this typology? Yeah? But this line here, 1980, where is Panium in this history? Is Panium in this history? It's here and here, Raphia and Panium, and we've expanded it down here. So we know that this is a fractal of this history, but it's also a type. Is that okay? So I think typology and fractals are essentially the same thing. In fact, when we do this history here, which we said history 2, we agreed that it was equal to history 1. That was the definition of typology. And to make it equal, how do you make them equal? Don't you have to line up the waymarks? So this one here, which is the omega, where would that have to line up? Wouldn't it have to line up with that one? And this would be the alpha, and alpha would have to line up. So we'd have to expand this out, or shrink this one back down, so we get the scale the same, and then they become typology. So I think fractals and typology are the same thing, but we don't always have to do fractals. So when it's history, two separate and distinct histories, that I don't think is fractals. So fractals are a type or a form of typology, but they can be the same thing, but they don't necessarily have to be the same thing.
Yeah, non-identical fractals.
Sorry?
About the non-identical fractals.
Non-identical fractals. I don't know, I just struggle with the identical ones. I'm not sure about non-identical ones. I'm not even sure what non-identical ones mean properly. They're just not the same. I'm only joking, sorry.
I kind of always understood fractals as you take a little part and zoom in, so I'm kind of seeing a big difference to typology. For the typology, it seems like you're comparing, but with fractals, it's like you can take a section, for example, let's say midnight crime to the Sunday law, and then it becomes a progression line.
Midnight Cry to the Sunday Law.
I just said something random, but I think you take a section, but then from there, you're not comparing it with history, you're just looking at it in isolation.
I don't know if you can see that down here. You've got the close of probation to the second advent. And how do we know what raphia is? Sorry? What is raphia to us? Close of probation. How do we know it's close of probation? Sorry? Which line? No, it is the priest line. This is the line of the priest, because that's the line we're creating. So how do we know in that line raphia is a close of probation? Yeah, but I made it line up. The movement made it line up, because I'm just saying I want to put raphia here. How can I put raphia here? So the difficulty is we've got problems because at this scale it's not typology, it's progression, and at this scale it appears to be typology. So we have this dilemma of how we deal with this problem. This is why people say that this rule about no typology in a line isn't valid, isn't true. Because at this scale, this is not typology, this is progression. Raphia is just a progression that brings you to the close of probation. But for the priest, it's a different experience.
I'm not yet convinced that typology is fractals. I don't think it's the same thing, because the way I understand fractals is, the way I understand typology is we have two wheels. We have wheel 1 and wheel 2. And we can overlay them. But how I understand fractals is that within wheel 1, inside it we have wheel 1 is made up of many wheels within it. So it's the same wheel, but inside it there's like some self-replication of the same thing within the same wheel. And for me that is what fractals is, which is essentially different from what typology is. At typology is we have two different histories being overlaid on top of each other, but when you come to fractals, it is like one big line, but the progression of that one big line has some self-replication within it. So it's not really, for me I don't see it as a typology. So for example, when you come into that small line that you put there, 1989 to Penia, for me it's not a type of 1989 to the second coming, but it is the 1989 to the second coming in progression, and how that progression happens is that it happens in self-replication.
Any other comments? Do you agree, disagree?
So what I can say is, what he's saying, you can see it in the line of secondary geometry. So you see that secondary geometry arrives in April 19, so you see that up to the whole probation. So you see that what happens, there is a self-replication in that history in new history of mineralized. So that's the same that I can see in fractal. I would say that is a type or a typology, but to make a line of 4
Is that agreeing with him? Or disagreeing?
No, I'm saying that typology and fractal
are the same.
I would also second Brother Robert and suggest that there are two different things. In that, in typologies, we work with two different histories at exactly the same scale. But with fractals, we'll be dealing with a smaller scale that will be used to present a larger scale. So in typologies, it's either at exactly the same scale, but with fractals, we'll have a smaller scale, typifying a larger scale.
So let me just ask a question for Brother Robert. We agree this is a line of progression, and we can expand this history here underneath. We can get these things to line up, but this is still not typology. So if I find here a waymark, and then I say that waymark, there must be one here. How do I know there must be one here? Because there was one here.
So as I'm saying, for me, the way I understand fractals is we have that large scale, and that large scale is reflected at smaller scale. That large scale is made of many smaller scales that have the same characteristics as the big scale. So I've not done typology, but the big scale allows me to see that the self-replications of that big scale and the smaller scale has the same characteristics.
Okay, so even though it looks like we're doing this and bringing it down here, the thought process is slightly different. So you run us through the thought process of how you understand typology.
What?
What is typology?
So the way I understand typology is, as you have said, you have two different histories. But the whole reason why we got into this discussion of typology is because of what was being done with 9/11 being a type of midnight. So it's like what happened at 9/11 was imperfect, and it was pointing to a perfect history that will come and happen in the future. So the way I understand typology is like something that is pointing to, it is one thing happening, pointing to another thing that will happen. For example, Millerite history is pointing to what will happen in our history. So that's how I understand typology. Different things, one is pointing to the other, but the purpose is not the same.
Define typology again, I missed it.
Typology. So the way I understand typology is what Roger said.
I can't remember what they said.
We have two different histories. For example, Millerite history, the history of London was 4,000. When you overlay them, the history of the Millerites will be a type of the history of the 104,000.
Okay, so typology, three people are saying, is when you talk about two separate and distinct histories and you don't consider the scale. There's no shrinking or expanding. It's just the history of the Millerites and our history, and we don't consider the subject of time or the time span between those histories. All we look at is the waymarks, and if the waymarks line up, they line up. But it's always two separate histories. So that's typology. Progression is when you just take a large history and you ignore the details. And you could have many histories in that, and you just go from the beginning to the end. And in that, you have waymarks, which hopefully get you from the beginning to the end. When you come to fractals, what you're doing is taking a singular history here, and you see within that history, there is two smaller histories. But what you're seeing is that this smaller history here has all the identical characteristics of this one. But this point here is not pointing to this one. It has its own separate, unique, distinct characteristics. Even though they're both called omega, even though they're both called close of probation, this close of probation is not pointing you to this one, as in typology, it's a type. It's a real close of probation. It's something that's genuine and not fake. Brother Kephas. You had your hand up before. No? Yeah. The comment?
I need to proceed your last point.
Repeat my last point. Someone else repeat my last point. Someone else tell me how they understand it. Sister Emma, do you want to have a go? No. My brother, do you want to have a go?
The last point I said, the last remark is what COP of that moral history. They don't have the same characteristics as the COP of the larger history.
structure. But according to typology, that those the alpha and omega equals, or the way back, have the same characteristics as the larger story.
The way you are explaining it, I'm not seeing any difference.
Okay, so you explain it again.
Because, for example, your last statement is that...
Don't worry about mine, you explain it. Don't confuse the people more.
So what I'm saying is the way I understand typology, I think my understanding of the wheels within this is still the best way for me to explain. I have two wheels. Wheel 1 is Millerite history. Wheel 2 is the history of the 144,000. So these two are types of each other there. That is what I understand typology to be. You can overlay them together. This is one wheel, this is another wheel, so they look like each other. But fractals is when I come to the history of the 144,000, which is one wheel. But I realize that that one wheel is made of many similar threads that make up that one big wheel. So it's like when you have a chain, you have a big chain, but if you cut a small section of that big chain, that small section will look exactly, will have the same characteristics exactly as the bigger scale. So at that point, I see a difference between typology and fractals. Because for me, a fractal is a magnification of the bigger scale at a smaller scale. That's what we call it in the beginning, we call it self-magnification. So it's a magnification of a bigger line at a smaller scale. So it's not a type, so this fractal is going to be part of the bigger scale. It's going to be part of the bigger scale. So the bigger scale is made up of many histories, and when you take one portion of that bigger scale, it looks exactly the same as that big scale. That's how I understand.
Can I ask a question?
Okay.
So if you have two wheels, Millerite history and the history of the 144,000, what allows you to line them up?
How do we line these things up? What do we have to be able to do to line them up?
I would answer this way. Sister White says history of the Millerites will repeat that of 144 to the beginning. So, but the fact that history will repeat gives us a warranty to place them, to line them.
So we have some clues that these histories, or this history typifies this history. So what we then have to do is, using those clues, work out how we line them up.
And also one of the rules is that history repeats itself.
So God is the one who shows the end from the beginning.
So I don't think that answers my question directly.
Okay.
For example, in Millerite history, we have waymarks. For example, what allows me to come and say October is a symbol of close of probation in the history of the 144,000. I know this quotation earlier says that Millerite history typifies our history, but that history is made up of waymarks. What allows us, or what prophetic license do we have to take those waymarks and line them up with waymarks in our history?
So with the first one, I assume would be relatively straightforward. You go to 1140, and then you could begin to line them up that way. You go to the verse and you try and understand what that verse teaches. Then you begin to do that. So how do you get a middle way mark here in the Millerite line and line it up with our line here? So if this is 1840, how do we know what 1840 would line up with our history with? I guess you take a characteristic here, which is a restraint, and then you mark it with a restraint here. I think that's how we did it.
So that's the point I wanted, is that you look at these waymarks see their characteristics, and see how they are repeated in our history. So that's dusted and done. When you come to fractals, what allows you to take this smaller line and line it up with a bigger line?
So what allows us to line these things up like this? And these two would go here. How do we begin to line these up? Sorry? Would you not have to use the same methodology?
So that's my point, because you were saying that when we are doing fractals, each one has probably unique characteristics, but I'm saying no. We have to see some similar characteristics between this smaller line and the bigger line in order to be able to line up this way in a fractal. So as much as you're saying there is a difference, I don't see a big difference. There are similarities I'm seeing, there are differences I'm seeing.
So, how do you line this one up with this one? You have to go into whichever one you're starting with. You go into this history, see some characteristics here, go into this one and see if you see similar characteristics, and that's how you begin to line them up, and you'd get this one and expand it out and it would line up. So it seems like you're using similar methodology.
Yeah, I think for me I'm recognizing the theoretical difference between fractals and typology. As in explaining, you can see them, but when it comes to lines, I'm not seeing how I can conceptualize that. And you gave an example that if you go to Genesis to Revelation, that can be one line, a one bigger line. But I think in that line, we need to see different histories, and we can see fractals there. So really, as far as we can have a theoretical differences between the two, now when it comes to representative life, I'm seeing like, again, we need to see both of them. So for me, I don't see how now it works in lines. Because where you break down that history, let's say, if you have come with a bigger line, let's say it's the everlasting gospel of Genesis to Revelation, that one line you can break it to different histories, which you can call now one history can be a type of the other. But when you come to that histories, again, you need to different classes, which I can call different histories. Let's see now the history of the priest and the bigger history of the 144,000. So that fractal, you use the same concept as that of typology. So I don't see unless we show how that works in lines.
Okay, so please hold your questions. We'll pray, close class, have a break, and then we'll come back. Please don't forget your questions. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you praise and thanks for your goodness and mercy. Please guide, direct us as we walk through this day. We seek for a blessing and wisdom and understanding on how to distinguish between these different concepts. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.